Hello, everybody. So my name is Sam McGeown, and I'm part of the technical marketing team for vRealize Automation, and specifically for CodeStream. But I deal with sort of all the DevOps side of things, Kubernetes, anything that's more sort of developer side of vRealize Automation. So I'm going to talk to you today about infrastructure pipelining with vRealize Automation CodeStream, something that I spent a lot of time talking about. So hopefully, you know, I can get through this 125 slide presentation. Actually, no, this is literally one slide to say hello, and the rest of this is going to be me showing you the product and hopefully showing you some pipelines and that sort of thing. So I promised that there would be more demonstration than slides. Well, that's 2 slides, and we're done. So what's CodeStream? Very brief introduction for everybody who's not actually, although I heard you guys are fairly up with it, but CodeStream's our pipelining tool within the platform. It speeds up application and infrastructure delivery. We have built-in troubleshooting and dashboards within the platform, and basically we can automate a lot of release and deployment processes through CodeStream, which always sounds very boring until you actually sort of get going with it and see the power of the tool, which is why I'm going to go through the tool live rather than trying to show you slides around it. So if you think of a sort of a software release pipeline, you might have a developer who's checking in code continuously into the platform, into your source control, something like GitHub, GitLab. That check-in event or a merge request will then trigger a pipeline. So we'll have a webhook triggering a pipeline. And in this case, we'll be triggering CodeStream pipelines. We might build container images with that new checked-in code. We'll then push that Docker image up to, say, a repository like Harbor or Docker Hub. And then we might go through a deployment phase and run some automated testing, approvals and things like that within a pipeline, and then finally push that new version of the application out to a Kubernetes cluster. And then that new code would then be live. And the idea is to go much more quickly from the point where your developer's checking in code to actually having that code running in production, and to be able to have that consistently. And what we're finding with CodeStream is actually there's a lot of use cases to adopt that kind of methodology around with infrastructure use cases. So what we've termed sort of infrastructure pipelining. So I'm going to go through a couple of examples on that later on, but for now I'm going to just walk through the platform, and we'll start off here in the pipelines page. So hopefully you can all see on page, the pipelines are our basic unit of our basic mechanism for sequencing tasks, and within each pipeline, I've lost my mouse. Where's it gone? Within each pipeline, so when I open this pipeline up, we have a series of stages. So here I've got a common stage, a deploy stage, a test and migrate stage, and a delete stage here. And then within each stage, we have a series of tasks, and those tasks can be different kind of, we can do sort of REST API tasks, we can do Kubernetes tasks, we have a CI task for running scripts within a Docker container. We can deploy blueprints within Cloud Assembly, poll tasks. There's a whole range, a whole palette of tasks that we can actually use. And if you look on the left-hand side here, when I expand out the menu, you can see there's, we can connect via SSH, we can jump to a PowerShell host, we can call out to vRealize Orchestrator. So there's a lot of integrations that we can do, and each task, obviously, we can then pass information into a task and return information from those tasks. Now, I'm going to jump out of the pipelines here and talk a little bit about the configuration of the platform. So projects are mapped to the same projects that you have within vRealize Automation Cloud or vRealize Automation 8.x. So we have, in my Cloud Assembly, I've got 3 projects. Those projects are exactly the same within CodeStream. The endpoints are, as you might expect, integrations with various different third-party systems. And if we actually have a look, we can see the different types of endpoints that are available. Typically, you see a lot of Docker and Docker registry, Git integrations, Jenkins, so calling out to Jenkins tasks, things like Jira, Kubernetes integration as well, we see a lot of, and also vRealize orchestrator, so you can execute your orchestrator workflows as well. Because I'm on VRA Cloud here, I can use my cloud proxy to proxy into my SDDC and connect to, for example, like GitHub on-premises, so GitHub Enterprise or GitLab Enterprise, or my on-premises Jenkins server, or various different endpoints. So you can see here, I've got, I'm doing some work around the differences between the different endpoints here. So I've got Bitbucket Enterprise, Bitbucket Cloud, GitLab Cloud, GitLab Enterprise, loads of different Git integrations. I'm connected to a Kubernetes cluster. I've got a connection to Docker registry here, and Docker host, a couple more Docker hosts, an agent on my cloud proxy as well. So there's various different endpoints that I've got configured that are building up my tasks. And those are how we're integrating with third-party tools. And then also we have within the platform variables, and I tend to use variables for anything I want to hide, keep secret. So access tokens, API tokens, things like that. Various different information. You can also use it to create target different environments and have different pipelines that can connect to, say, your production environment, your development environment, your test environment, and actually begin moving things through that process from test forwards to production. So variables are quite useful, and I'll show you how they're referenced later in a moment. As I mentioned before, we've got pipelines, and you can see on the pipeline view here, you can see a summary of sort of recent executions. This one has failed 4 times recently, but there was a successful one there. But we can actually dig into the executions of all our pipelines, and typically you'll see a lot more green. It'll look a bit more like that. Because I'm developing stuff on, this is my personal instance, or my development instance here, you've got a lot of pipelines that are failing, which is, you can see the stage, for example, at which this has failed. And if we dig into the details of a deployment, we can then actually go in and look at each stage. We can look at the details of the execution. We can look at the inputs that happened. We can look at the workspace configuration, and I'll talk about that in a minute, and also the outputs from the workflow if there were in the pipeline. And then we can actually go in and actually look at the specific tasks that are happening. So we can see the logs of, for example, the script that executed here. We can look at the inputs and outputs from the Kubernetes API calls. So you can dig in and grab a whole load of detail, and it makes it very easy to come and say, have a look at, see which stage failed, and then actually dig into why this particular one failed.
Sam, I have a question. Is it time for questions during your presentation, or?
Much prefer questions. If you'd like to ask me an actual question, please feel free.
Okay, so there's a question from Rudolf. It is in Dutch, so I shall translate it for you. So what's the scope of the variables? Is the secrets, are those saved in the context of the user, or how is that managed within the solution?
Yeah, it's a good question. So when you create a variable, you can create a plain text one, a secret one, or a restricted one. So a secret one, it basically will never be, should never be shown within the interface or the logs. So it should always be obfuscated. The restricted ones will only be allowed to be used within the scope of the project that you're talking about. So a restricted one is encrypted. It's never shown, and it's restricted to the project specifically. So you can't. Sorry, that's my daughter bashing on the door. You can't access it from another project. So that's the way that the variables are scoped there.
Okay, thank you.
So it's not on a user scope. It's using the project scope. So if you've got access to a project, incidentally, you can't actually view the value of those secrets once they're in there. They're encrypted, and you can't view them. You can only use them within the pipelines.
Okay, thanks. Great.
Okay, where were we? We were talking about executions. So yeah, our executions give you the detail and the troubleshooting within the platform. The pre-canned dashboards. So I've not configured any customization on any of these dashboards. There are no custom dashboards here. This is all out of the box built. So the last viewed dashboard was my blue-green deployment, and if I have a look through, I can see things like when it was most recently executed. It was triggered by a Git webhook. It went for 5 minutes. I can look in the last 30 days. It's run 26 times and completed 10 times, failed more times, and was cancelled once. So you can get some really good details on your executions. You can also sort of scroll through and have a visual reference as to where things have failed. So typically what you'll see is when I'm developing a pipeline, the first stage will run quite a lot of times because that doesn't change. The second stage will fail the first few times, and then it will start executing. So the stages, for example, here there's only 3 stages here rather than the 4 that are in the final pipeline, and it's as I'm developing, it's building out. And then you can look at specific execution details and see what the common errors are. And so this is aimed at if you're automating release pipelines and you want to know, well, 85% of the time it was successful, or 50% of the time it's failed, it needs to improve, that sort of information around your automation. So yeah, that's the dashboards that are available, and for every pipeline it's going to build a dashboard for each one by default, and then you can customize them. So that's dashboards. We've done executions. So user operations are tasks within your pipeline that you can have, for example, an approval stage. You can pause and have a group of approvers or an individual approver who has to come in and run a test, and perhaps you want to have a manual test of a deployment before you then allow the pipeline to continue. So within this tab, you'll see there are no active approvals. So there's no pipelines waiting for an approval, but you can see here that I've approved and rejected a few pipeline stages previously, and you can actually look into the details of the execution and what happened, and if your approver writes a message within the response, it will have that information in there as well. Custom integrations, I don't have any custom integrations here, but basically if you've got a script that you run repeatedly, or an integration with a third-party API or something that you do a lot of, you can create a new custom integration. You can write it in Node.js, Python 2 or 3, or a Bash script, and when you create a new integration, you're basically creating a task, and then that allows you, the example it gives you when you create a new one is to call out via API to your Slack and create a webhook to actually message your Slack. But you can basically use this to create an integration with anything, and then use that task on a pipeline in a sort of repeatable way. So it allows you to extend the platform, and then obviously once this is a draft, once it's published, you could then go into a pipeline and drag that into your tasks. Finally, we've looked through this. So finally, we're talking about the triggers, and I'm going to talk specifically about the Git triggers because I've got them configured on this version, but we can trigger from Docker. So we can create a webhook from a Docker endpoint and configure, for example, a specific image. Whenever a new version of a specific image is pushed up, we could trigger a pipeline off of that. I have within my Git configuration plenty of webhooks configured. So this green-blue demo app webhook is one of the pipelines that I'm going to show you in a minute. So I'll go into a bit of detail on this. So I have a webhook configured here. It's a very simple one. It's going to trigger my GitOps blue-green deployment pipeline whenever new code is pushed to a specific repository. So my endpoint, which is configured under the endpoints, is my GitHub blue-green demo app. I'm looking at a specific branch, which is my main branch. There's a secret token, which just allows us to authenticate between the two. So we're not accepting from anywhere. We can do explicit file inclusions or exclusions. So for example, you could match a regex to all YAML files to only trigger if it's a YAML file updated rather than a MD, markdown file that's just documentation. You don't want to trigger an update on an application because the documentation has changed. So yeah, you can filter around that. And then you can also configure the trigger, whether it's for a push request or a pull request. The API token here is an API token which is sent from Git to the vRealize API. You can obviously validate SSL and things like that, and then select the pipeline that you're going to trigger. You can also build in an execution trigger delay. So you might not want to instantly trigger if there's potentially multiple changes, something happened at the same time. So let's have a look at an example of this, because it's all a bit abstract until we go through it. So the first one I'm going to actually do is the Packer template builds here. And what this is using a repository, a Git repository. I have all of my Packer templates configured, and if I execute them locally, I can use the Packer command line, and I can build out some new templates on my vSphere environment. But perhaps I don't want to do that as an admin. I certainly don't want to be doing it, a few times a week or once a week or whenever the templates are updated. So I want to automate the building of my templates for vSphere. So in this pipeline, we have a couple of stages. We have a stage that prepares, so it does a bit of preparatory work, pulls out some objects and things like that. We have a build stage, which actually builds the Packer images and then makes some API calls. We then test the image. So I'm going to push it into Cloud Assembly as a new image. We're going to push out a deployment, check that those deployments work. We have a manual stage here to test the images. And once we're happy that the tests are completed, we deploy it, we delete the deployment, and then we release it. So we're updating an image profile within Cloud Assembly to use those latest versions. So the CI task, and I said I was going to talk about workspace, didn't I? So the workspace configuration is the context of your pipeline. So you can see here, I've got a Docker host, which I'm connecting to, and this is an endpoint that was configured within the platform. And this endpoint is where I'm going to run my CI tasks. Those CI tasks are going to run on a Docker image, and the image is a specific one, which is available on Docker Hub, and it's the latest version of my CodeStream CI Packer image, which has Packer tools installed on it. You can also configure an image registry. So if you've got an endpoint, your own private Docker Hub, you can pull your image from your own private hub. You can configure things like the working directory, the amount of cache that you keep. So if you're producing artifacts, so you're producing content that you want to be available afterwards, you can create a cache directory. You can inject some environment variables into each container. And also you can select a limit on how much memory and CPU is allowed. And also within the platform, if you're triggering from a Git pipeline, so a webhook trigger from Git, you can automatically clone that Git pipeline in. So you need to configure the Git clone, and then that takes us neatly to the inputs. So the inputs are like the form inputs that you're going to get for your pipeline. If you're configuring from a webhook, you need to automatically inject your Git parameters, or if you're triggering from Docker, you need to automatically inject your Docker parameters. And you'll see that this down here injects some automatic information that's going to come from the payload of your webhook.
Sam, I have there's a question in the Q&A
Yep.
from Leander. Our organization is already using Azure DevOps for deploying to Azure itself. Is it possible to create an integration between CodeStream and Azure DevOps or other tooling with pipelines, or do we need to choose between one of those products?
Yeah, so you could integrate using the REST API tasks, or you could integrate using Python or Node.js. So you could actually write those custom integrations yourself. Yeah. You can do it. There is the integration with TFS. A question that comes up a lot is does that cover the TFS integration? Does that cover the Azure DevOps? No, it doesn't. But my understanding is that the aim is that will also integrate with that. So hopefully at some point in the future we'll have a direct integration with Azure DevOps. For now, you can make the REST API calls, or you can use a custom integration.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Okay, so our input parameters are basically configuring our pipeline, and then the model is obviously our pipeline configuration itself. So this is a CI task that we have running here, and hope it's not too small on your screen. Hopefully, I've tried to zoom in a little bit to get enough information going on. So, for example, here I'm taking exporting a variable called build time. So that's what I'm using to create unique names for my images, the images that Packer's building. I'm also exporting some variables because I want those variables to be available in a lot of different tasks. I'm also doing things like splitting the username and domain and manipulating some of the inputs to make sure that we can authenticate properly. I'm manually cloning my template in case it's not triggered by a webhook, and then I'm also exporting some variables for the API calls later on. And then we start doing some REST API calls. So, for example, this one is authenticating with vRealize Cloud using my refresh token, which is an input. Incidentally, if I want to use a variable, I can reference that using variable rather than input. And that syntax is similar across all of the tasks. So if I type a dollar, then an open bracket, I can have, I can type variable dot, and it should bring up on the screen somewhere. He says, there we go. Should bring up all the variables that are accessible in the platform. If I type input dot, that should then give me all of the inputs for the pipeline. I can also reference the stages. So if I type prepare environment, I'm referring to this first stage, and then I can refer to the tasks within this stage. So the configure environment task, I can then look at the outputs and the exports, and then I can have a look at the variables which I exported from my first task. So if I've got these variables that I'm outputting, I could take that build time and actually bring that into here. So I could reference that directly. Build time. And that would then resolve to the value of that output. So here I'm making an authentication. I'm making a post. I've got a couple of headers in, but it's not really anything significant in that API call there. I'm then using some get tasks. So again, the API, I'm doing a get against things like my vSphere cloud accounts. And if you see here, I'm actually doing one of those referrals back to the task. I'm creating a bearer token based on the response from my authentication task. So my vRealize Cloud authentication task. I'm getting the output, I'm getting the JSON response from the API call, and I'm getting the token property of that JSON response. And I'll show you the easiest way to look that up. In fact, let's do that now. So if I drop out of that pipeline and I go to an execution of this one, you can see here it's executed, and I've done my VRA cloud authentication here. And if I select that task and I go to the view output JSON, I can then see all of the output. But if I want to reference something later on, and I know for example, the property that I want to find is the token property, I can search for it and it'll actually highlight it, or not highlight it, it'll actually tell me the path, and that's the variable I need to reference the output from this task. So you see here the prepare environment cloud authentication output task is referenced there. So I carry on, I make some queries. I'm pulling out cloud accounts, project IDs, I'm getting the image profile. All of this stuff is sort of preparation. And then I'm going to use some bash to manipulate. So I'm using jQuery to manipulate the responses from those queries and get the specific token IDs and things. So all of that's preparing the environment. I'm then going to run my Packer build. So I'm importing, so I'm .sourcing my Packer secrets file, which is only around for the lifetime of this container. I'm moving into my Git repository, into my templates folder, and then I'm going to validate my Packer configuration, and then I'm going to build my Packer configuration. And so this task generally takes about 15-20 minutes for Packer to actually build all of my configuration. So it's about 8 templates that are being built all at once in parallel. Once those VMs have been built on vSphere, I'm going to trigger an image enumeration so that VRA is aware of those images. And then this is a poll task. So I'm basically polling for that image enumeration task to complete. I'm then going to do a query to get the images. And at that point, I am ready to test. So I'm going to create an image profile for the test profile. So basically I do a create, sorry, that's a get. So I look it up and either create the image profile or update it depending on whether it exists. And that's quite interesting. Yeah. So the precondition here is I'm looking back to my prepare environment and I'm seeing if the image profile ID exists. So if the image profile ID is a null, then I need to create one. If the image profile ID already exists, so it's not a null, I update that image profile. So depending on whether I need to update or create it. I then create a blueprint and then request a deployment of that blueprint to test my images. And then finally, we wait for that deployment. Again, another poll task, we wait for the deployment. And this is my user test operation. So I'm the only user ID here of approvers. So I can come in and approve this task and it just says, please test the deployed images. And then clean up after itself. So once I approve that task, we're going to clean up the deployment and clean up that blueprint because those were just there for the test phase. And then finally, we're going to release that. So we're going to release that image profile. And so we're going to create a new image profile. We're then going to use the CI task and manipulate that to update it with the new image profile ID. So the image IDs from the API. And then I just update that image profile and push that out. And at that point, my profile has updated with those. So let's kick this off. So I've got a bunch of my inputs have been pre-populated with defaults to save me time typing it all out. So I've got my Git repository with my field demo packer templates. That's all my configuration sits in that Git repository. I'm going to limit which ones I build to hopefully save a bit of time. I'm not going to build the Windows one, that takes a long time. So let's just do CentOS 8 and Ubuntu 18. I'm going to build it on my vCenter cluster in a vSAN. I'm going to build it in a folder. I'm going to connect it to a network. And so these are all the inputs that Packer requires to actually build this. And then we've got some VRA configuration to make the API calls back to VRA. So then let's start the execution. And we should see this execution starting to kick off. Now, this may take a bit of time, so we'll come back and have a look at this in a minute. Have we got any other questions at the moment? How are we doing for time? I've lost track of when I'm supposed to be finishing.
So we have about 15 minutes left.
15 minutes.
15.
Okay, cool.
No questions right now, but yeah, for the audience, feel free to ask any questions you may have.
Yeah, I would much rather have a conversation with you guys than me talk at you. If this is really interesting for you and you want to hear me just monologue, then don't say anything. But if you've got any questions, please ask.
And also, if somebody wants to talk, you can raise your hand in the Zoom session, and then we can allow that you can ask your question, or please let us know.
Okay, so I'm going to have a look at another one of these pipelines, as one I mentioned earlier, this GitOps blue-green deployment. And so the idea of this pipeline is it's a Kubernetes application. That's, again, the YAML file configurations are on my Git account. And what I'm going to do is push an update to my Git account. So I'm going to update the YAML, and then that should trigger the pipeline call and then start updating the application. And so hopefully everyone's vaguely familiar with a blue-green deployment, but effectively the blue deployment is the currently running deployment, and the green deployment is the newer version of code that I want to release. And what happens is, in parallel, these two environments are deployed. So blue is already existing, all the public access, all the users are accessing the blue one. I'm going to deploy the green version, which is my code change version. I'm then going to test that version that's being code changed. Assuming that works okay, I'm going to have an approval stage. I'm going to approve that deployment. And what's going to happen is going to flip the public access, so the end users can then flip over from accessing the blue to the green. And we're going to have another period of validation testing. And assuming we're all happy, the blue deployment gets scrapped, or it can be left in place depending on the resources requirements and things like that. So this pipeline is automating that blue-green deployment process, and it's using primarily the Kubernetes tasks. So you'll see a whole bunch of Kubernetes tasks here. So in order to demonstrate this, I'm going to switch to the correct repository. Hopefully I'm in the right place now. Okay, so we're going to have a look. So this is my copy of this repository. Let's zoom this a little bit so we can see. So within this repository, I've got some YAML configuration for Kubernetes. So I'm going to create a namespace. I've got an SSL certificate, which is being created here. I've got a configuration map, which is configuring Nginx. I've got a HTML file, which can be injected into my container. A deployment of a simple Nginx instance within, so I'm going to deploy 3 replicas of Nginx. I'll be injecting in the SSL secret, so the config map, the secret I create for SSL is being injected in as the SSL certificates, and then the Nginx configuration is being mounted within the Nginx configuration folder, and the HTML file is within the HTML path. So what this allows us to do is have basically an application running on a specific commit ID. And then I've got a test service, which is creating a load balancer on a specific port, 8443. And then the public service is actually running on port 443. So what this looks like in practice, if I switch back to here, is so running hopefully, yeah, there we go, on demo app CMB local, we can see my Nginx is running. It's saying welcome to the demo app, and it's telling the commit ID that from my Git repository, and that's unique to each commit. So, which is the reason why I'm showing it here. If I try and go to port 8443, you can see that that's going to time out. There's nothing running on that. Now, I specifically haven't filtered on the markdown file here, so that I can create a new commit and save that, and then I can push that change up to my Git repository. So demo the webhook. Commit that, and then push that up to my Git repository.
I have a question here, Sam, so if you have time.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. So it's about you're now testing manually. What automated test frameworks can you use, and do you have any advice on that?
So effectively, you could do anything that has a CLI or an API. The REST API task can allow you to integrate with pretty much anything you like.
Yeah.
If you've got a CLI tool, you can package that in a Docker container and then run that container as a CI task and integrate with anything that has a CLI tool. So what I don't have at the moment in the lab is a tool for example, a security scan of an image. What I want to get integrated into my Packer pipeline is actually an automated test that will run a security scan and just look for vulnerabilities on my template that's deployed in the test pipeline.
Yeah.
And then hopefully that would then, you will return a success or failure based on that. And obviously a failure you wouldn't want to release to your production environment. Whereas, a success, you'd have a higher level of confidence releasing the pipeline. So the answer is you can integrate with almost anything you can imagine. It's a bit of a Swiss Army knife like that. There are some limitations, but normally you can figure out a way of integrating using, REST API or with even you could run a CI task and use curl to access a SOAP API or something. There's a lot of possibilities of what you could do.
And there's a comment from Rudolf now, but I don't know this solution. Maybe Behat. You know that? BEHAT?
No, I don't know that. I think with the Salt acquisition, Salt Stack acquisition, we're looking at our integration options, and they've got some good integration options within the Salt environment. So part of also adopting and bringing in the use cases for Salt will be looking at that integration and hopefully getting some integration with Salt going there. So hopefully at some point within the next few months I'll be demonstrating that integration, but we have to see how things go with that one.
Yeah, of course. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, so let's have a look at the Git triggers, and you can see here under the Git activity that my Git commit message was demo webhook, and you can see that it's submitted a new commit. I've got the commit ID there. There's the subject, and you can see that there's an execution actually running right now. So if I click into this execution, we should be able to open up and see the progress. So my pipeline was executed. You can see those auto-injected parameters, branch name, subject, the Git commit ID, which is what I'm actually using to create unique instances, and various bits of information along the way up. if we have a look at the workspace setup, you can see the container was started, and then there's a CI agent which needs to be on the container. It's actually installed on the container as the container started. So we can see that it's running on my Docker host. We can also see that the git clone completed, so it's automatically cloned my blue-green deployment repository there into. It's failed on so it's tried SSH first of all, and then it's done it on HTTPS. So it's although there's a fail message there, it's because it's been trying to do it over SSH first. So yeah, I've got my CodeStream blue-green deployment folder there. I then initiate my first CI task, and what I'm doing there is using a reverse pass, basically to get the commit ID of the previous commit, and then that's being exported as a variable. So the blue commit ID, that's the existing commit, is this FB33 commit. And if you look, hopefully here, you can see that that's the commit that's running, the FB33 one. So this isn't the commit that I've just made. This is the previous revision.
We have about 4 minutes left, Sam, for your.
Okay, I'll go very quickly. Just validating that the namespace actually exists. If the namespace exists, it's not going to do anything on this task. And again, validating that SSL certificate exists. These things are common across the blue and the green deployment. So just need to make sure that exists. I then deploy the green application. So I'm pushing out that config map. And what you'll see is the new commit ID. So that's the commit ID of the one I've just pushed has been injected into the config. So you can see the name of this config map includes the commit ID. And that's how we're getting 2 unique deployments. I'm going to create a deployment, and again, it's that same 091 commit. And then I'm creating that test service. So this is now exposing it on 8443. So if I run 8443, we can see our new commit IDs there, 091. If we go back to just 443, the old one is still running. So this is our blue deployment, and 8443 is our green deployment. And then CodeStream's paused, and it said, can you please test this? So I'm going to approve that. It's giving me the URL there to go and test. So I approved that. So we're then going through the update the public service, and then it's going to pause for another test. And that should then have brought my code alive. Now, one thing I haven't mentioned before, we can have pipelines execute on a failure. So we can have a rollback pipeline. Should I fail this pipeline here, there's something wrong and I want to roll back, then there's a Kubernetes rollback task, and I can roll back from that. So now 091 should be available on my public URL. There we go. So that's now available on my public URL. And so we flipped over to the green application code deployment. And then this is going to go and approve that, and it's going to go through and deploy the old service there. Now let's very quickly go and see where my Packer template's got to. So we did that. So it's still building my Packer images. And if we look here, we can see the output from Packer. It's installing packages on CentOS, updating packages at the moment. So with 2 minutes left, are there any other questions? Hopefully that's been informative. I know it's a lot of ground to cover on in a 45-minute session. Any further questions? Any last minute?
Oh, any questions from the audience? Maybe through the Q&A or the chat. I think it's a lot of information, very powerful tool with a lot of options and ways to integrate with different kind of solutions. Good job, Sam. Very informative, as Rudolf saying. So thank you, Rudolf.
Thank you. And I'll just mention, because it is my job, you can get a 45-day trial of CodeStream, of VRA Cloud, which you can kick the tires of CodeStream with. Erik
Scholten, very cool demo. Thank you, Erik. Yeah. Nice stuff. So why should, oh, there's a customer of a question, why should a customer go for CodeStream instead of something open source?
So that is entirely, as a customer, it's your prerogative. If you've already got vRealize automation for other use cases, then why not use the tool that's already there, part of it? The CodeStream is not going to do everything, so other pipelining tools might well provide you with more suitable use cases. But CodeStream is a very powerful platform to be able to automate, especially for the infrastructure tasks. That's where we're seeing a lot of that, those use cases. So it's a tool, and if the tool fits the job, then fantastic.
Cool. Okay, thanks. None for now. Thanks for this session. I'm going to test myself somewhere in the future. Well, that sounds good. Thank you, Leander. Very good. So with that, Sam, thank you very much for your time and your presentation during our virtual TechCon. Maybe we see each other another time in person. It's an annual event, so 2 times, yeah, it was a live event, and this year a full virtual event. So thank you again for presenting at our event. And
well, thank you for having me.